pick up on if a survivor is still going back to their abusers out of threats to loved ones and to their therapist, etc. Because they're afraid that they're stuck between, well, these people might get hurt if I defy my programmers and don't go back, or if I go back, they're just going to keep doing this to me for the rest of my life. What would you want to say to them?
You're going to find your little bits of points of power, and use them as keys to finding more safety, more personal empowerment, more choice. And that if you can, be a double agent to yourself, go in and report, but choose what to report. Have parts that can color it the way, or omit what they don't need to know, give them what they do need to know. Mm-hmm. Don't be afraid to play their game. If you're capable and strong enough to understand and know enough to understand it, or parts of your altar, some of your altars know enough to understand it, use their game against them.
Wonderful.
And one of the things I did very early in therapy was I wrote out people and places and names and things, and I put it in safe care, and told a whole lot of people that I was busily learning and remembering and healing, and if anything happens to me, these people have information, this information is available. And I, at first, I made it really, really clear, like, I'm talking, I'm telling everyone, and I told everyone everywhere. And it was actually a mechanism for making it safe, because at that point then, if they did anything to me, it made what I said more credible rather than less.
Yes.
So that was a piece that worked for me. I would say ask your, the psychology term is inner self-helper. I would say ask your wisest part of yourself, the parts that know and understand the bad guys in your life, and what their rules are and how they function, and then work within that to get more and more freedom by pulling out one piece at a time of freedom even. Mm-hmm. I don't know how to explain that any better.
That's good. Okay, thank you. In your chapter, the last 3 words are patterns can crumble.
Yes.
Do you want to speak about that?
I wouldn't want people to think that they couldn't heal because they didn't have this. But my dad was dissociative, and my dad was a part of all of this. I don't think he understood a lot of the stuff that was going on, but he must have understood and had some understanding enough to know that at the age of 6 they were sealing in the foundational altars, and that those altars and their under 6-year-old belief systems would be locked in. Because just prior to when that particular training session occurred, or pieces of it, my dad took me into my bedroom at home, and he had me sit on the floor at the end of the bed, and he said, and he sat down there with me, and he said, now you close your eyes and you go into that inner world of yours, whatever it is, go in there and go into what's in the middle of it, what's the most important thing in the middle of it. And I said, Mr. Tree. And he said, so you go into Mr. Tree then, and you go down, and he asked me enough questions to understand about the roots of Mr. Tree, and that Mr. Tree was the central thing in my system, and that the roots of Mr. Tree were where things happened too. And Dad he gave me a real physical piece of paper that he'd written some symbols on that I don't remember now, but they basically were a combination of words. And had me hide them inside at the bottom of the roots. He had me take the physical paper out of my hands and put that inside at the roots of Mr. Tree, hidden where only I knew about it. And he told me that was so that one day my life would be my own. And the words that he gave me to go with it were that patterns can crumble. And he said that is so you know that someday your life will be your own, and you won't have to do what they tell you anymore. And so he gave me the words patterns can crumble and this little code that we were able to access at some point. And that was how I reclaimed a lot of the foundational memories. So my dad had to have known enough to know about that and understood enough to understand about that. But he gave me this huge gift. And there's no part of me, even though I know that he was a perpetrator and etc. But I know that he'd be proud of me sitting here right now and putting this information out. And that chapter's in there. And it was kind of those last 3 words there, patterns can crumble. The missing end of the story isn't there, but so that became the last 3 words. And those were kind of in tribute to Dad. Because he could only bring us so far in breaking patterns. He told me from the time I was little, ask questions, think for yourself, and that went against all the programming. And here I am now, and I know that he's here with me at this point, guiding me in doing all we can to help.
So he wanted you to be able to be free, but he couldn't free you from what was going to happen at that point in your life?
Yeah.
Do you want to say about why he couldn't?
Well, because of the deals, as far as I understand it, the deals were made through my mom and my dad's father, not through my father, and that my father was basically just kind of on the sidelines and not the one in charge. And my understanding is that Dad received some kind of similar training when he was young and was discarded himself and wouldn't do what he was told, but wasn't able to escape enough and know enough and understand enough to be able to stop it from happening to me too. Mm-hmm. But that it was his dad and my mom that really got me involved in the worst of the stuff.
Okay, and for people who did not have a father who tried to help them like that, would you like to give them a message?
That your patterns can crumble too, and that you have it within you to find your own secret codes and your own secret understandings and knowledges that you can pull forth to as your own keys. You have your own keys, and you know them, even if you don't think you do. Some part of you knows those and can give them to you, and you can heal too, and your patterns can crumble. And when you get those old patterns crumbled, you get to build your own new ones. And it feels lots better.
Thank you. By the way, when I talked to you before, you said your IQ was 161.
That's what it was when I was young, when I was tested, yeah.
How old?
13.
Okay, I just want the world to know that in case anybody tries to discredit you.
Yeah, I was
that
an
your
honor
IQ is
roll
higher
student.
than most of theirs.
Yeah,
and most of ours.
I had a hard time with that. My therapist worked very long and very hard to make me understand that. I used to get so frustrated because I could not grasp the concept that my brain worked faster or quicker or better somehow than other people's. Mm-hmm. And I still don't 100% agree with it. I think that more than anything, I just got a whole lot more of my brain wired into working and turned on than the average person does.
Yes.
So I don't know that I believe that I'm any smarter in potential than other people. But just that, I was given so much training. How couldn't I have broadened my IQ?
Yes, you're densely synaptically wired. Mm-hmm. I've often wondered that. Is it that the abusers are selecting for the more brilliant children? I think that is a factor, but also does the process of being abused and the forced creation of alters cause more intellect and more synaptic density?
I believe it does. I believe it does, yeah. I used to actually, during the last few years of therapy, I don't know how it's possible, but I could feel which part of my brain was functioning at any time.
Yes, I've heard other survivors
A
describe
very
that
strange
too.
feeling. I could actually touch and draw where different things occurred.
And
It doesn't happen now.
Right. Interesting.
Did you know you had personalities before the age of 31 when you started reassociating?
Actually, I was still 30, but no, I didn't.
30.
Or 29. I hadn't yet turned 30.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know. I found out I had alters when I was 30. Yeah, I did not know I had alters. I did not know I was multiple. When I found out I was multiple and told my friends, they all the consensus was like, oh, of course, that makes sense of everything. And but I hadn't known. I knew I had different ways of being. I knew I had memory that was only work in certain situations that if I wasn't in the place where something happened, I probably wouldn't remember it. Or if the right question was asked, I might be able to remember it. But I knew my memory went that way. I knew I worked very hard to track what I had done on calendars and journals and stuff from a very young age. I knew that clothes really, really mattered, that the way I dressed made a huge difference to how I would be, and that colors. And I remember taking a lot of time to get dressed and choosing the colors based on what I was going to be doing. But I didn't know what any of that was about.
Mm-hmm. Were you frightened when you first discovered that you had dissociative identity disorder? Or I don't even know if you want to call it a disorder, but that's up to you.
Actually, I think it's a highly functional survival mechanism.
Uh-huh.
I think it's like a really, really advanced mechanism that the human race has gotten to at this point. I don't remember being frightened.
Mm-hmm.
I remember being shocked, overwhelmed, and puzzled, and at the same time as it really made sense of a lot of stuff. What else do I remember about when I first found out? I think mostly I just thought, oh no, this is going to be a lot of work to heal from. I think was primarily my... And I guess any fear was about what had happened to make it that way.
Okay.
At that point.
That brings me to my next question.
I tend to think of alters as being formed in, well, more than two ways, but two basic ways. One is kind of the person's own volition to help them cope with something, and the other is when a programmer or a sophisticated abuser does something to force a new split so that that alter can be used for their purpose.
There's parts that they forced into being, and some they just forced into being just to be broken off and hold certain types of things. Some they forced into being to be trainable. And some just I split off by myself.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there might be a couple of degrees of the splitting off by yourself. I think some is just something happens and the only way to cope is to split off.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that if you've got enough, for me anyways, with enough different kinds of traumas going on and enough, I had a lot of conflicting messages in my different types of trainings. Mm-hmm. I think my system learned how to make alters and how to make ones that could be developed, and did that on occasion, rather than just as a, oh no, I'm coping with this incident, more of a, this keeps happening, we have to have something to, a part to take it.
Uh-huh.
I know at 6, an alter was created, self-created, modeled after the character Nancy Drew. And that part's role was from the beginning to put together all the clues, find all the information, do what a detective does, so that someday we could put it all back together, ourselves back together.
So that was a hidden alter that was just working for you.
That was my own, my own creation. And when I would be involved in rituals and stuff, and there was kids that I had to hurt or that were going to be hurt, and I couldn't do anything to help them, that alter learned the technique of hypnosis that was used on me, and would hypnotize the kids to help the ones that were going to be hurt, to help ease their suffering when we couldn't do anything else.
How'd you get away with that? How'd you get a chance to hypnotize them without being caught doing that?
I was often had to prepare them for things, so I had a bit of time to do that. And there was just a really kind of very intense focusing of helping them to have, I guess it was more giving them a piece of the hypnosis. Some of it was hypnotizing them, but more it was helping them to understand that in this is going to be horrible, find something to focus on, different little like ways to cope too.
So that they wouldn't be completely overwhelmed, to help them keep their focus.
Yeah, and some of the secrets, like where if you stare at the wall and go into the wall or something, there's different ways of pulling yourself away. It was like giving them little clues on how to pull away or how to pull out a body or how to dissociate
So did
without knowing that that's what I was really doing.
so going out of body actually can spare a person some of the effects of the programming?
No,
No.
just basically spares them the suffering and the torture.
So kind of the bulk of the mind, spirit, whatever, can leave to not experience the torture, but the new alter that's formed will still be programmed?
Well, yeah, the ones that I was helping, they weren't necessarily being programmed.
Okay.
I think they were more just being used and tortured. They might have been being taught programming. I wasn't aware of it if they were at that with those ones. But yeah, for myself, I could be out of body, and the out of body alter might not get the programming.
Yes.
But there'd be another part that would stay in the physical being that
Yes.
would hold the programming.
That's what I thought.
Yeah.
Now, would you say when you went out of body like that, and a part would stay and receive the programming, would you say that the bulk of you would leave, or would just a part, like would just the host leave, or
I didn't exactly have a host.
you didn't have a host?
I kind of had a shell that everything came through.
So who left the body? Sorry, I'm trying to understand. This is very complex.
Everything, every part of me that was present that didn't need to be.
So most of you left.
Yeah, some altars would still be off in their own world, separate, gone,
Yes.
not a part of the incident. But any parts of me that were present because of lighting, because of sounds, because of being told to be there, whatever, sometimes just like that detective altar, she just kind of tried to hang around everywhere and learn everything. There was degrees. That she only went so far out of the body where she could stay and watch. Other parts went. One time I had an altar out of the body, went right out and through rocks. That was a creepy, creepy, creepy feeling. I don't know how that works, but that was not something any part of me was ever willing to do again after that. It was too creepy.
Too far.
Well, it was going through rocks, and it was like disintegrating through the rock and being disembodied. It was, I don't know. I don't understand how that one worked, but it was not something any part ever. We found doorways and other ways after that. They weren't going through things. They would, I guess, the physical parts that had to be there stayed. The parts that they were training with messages stayed, but anything else got as far away as they could. And depending on the situation, the training, whatever, there'd be varying numbers or parts or degrees. It's not something that's consistent the same every time. It's really different every time.
But it definitely helped you to be able to have lots of parts leave the body. Is there a downside to temporarily leaving the body?
Well, the parts that leave the body don't feel like the stuff that happened to the body is theirs. So it makes it more disconnected. It creates further disconnection. And for me, some of the parts when they were out of body, coming back into the body felt like putting an adult hand into a baby's glove or something. It felt really tight and constricting and constraining. And they didn't want to come back into the body because of that.
I've heard some survivors talk about parts that kind of stay out of their body, sort of floating along around them as they go through life.
Yeah.
Did you have that experience?
Yeah, I had some that weren't really ever concrete. They were more like that, yeah. Like that one detective part sort of fit that. She kind of had physical too, but she was also kind of always floating there. I had a part called Overseer that just kind of always watched everything. It depends on, are we talking before a certain age? Are we talking after they did the discard and lockdown programmings? Are we talking in my adult years before the therapy, after the therapy? It varies over the years. But at different times there was, yeah.
How'd you bring them back?
How'd did I bring them back? Just as the memories and the processing and the healing, and it just kind of most of it was a very gradual, just natural process, almost side effect of the stuff. One of the parts that was dissociated when I was 4, and she died. It was a death experience, and when the rest of me was brought back to life, she didn't come back to life. She thought she was dead. She stayed a cloud from I was 4, I think, at the time, and she stayed. She just understood she was a cloud, and she stayed that way until we learned about her in therapy, and then. There was a point where it became clear that as part of the healing we had to, and it was still very early in the healing, she was one of the earlier altars that we found, and we made her come back into the body, and for her it was a nightmare experience to come back in the body. I think it was like coming back into a dead body for her in some respects. Plus she felt she'd been a big expansive cloud for a long time, and now she's stuck in this body. It was a very uncomfortable feeling. And when we put her back in the body, it was like she was pretty much in a coma for a long time. And then she progressed inside to being in a wheelchair. And so it was a slow evolution of healing inside. Actually, all the altars had their own healing process inside. Each one followed what their own needs were in the healing.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Didn't you created a bunch of healing places?
Oh yeah, I had a healing house with healing hot tub that you could get into, and it would magically help heal you. We had a healing cavern that had some more of those healing hot springs. That was where the dark shadows had lived in the caves. They were relegated to horrible darkness, and then we brought in light and healing and made gymnasium for them and playground, and they had these the hot springs filled the air so that even breathing just helped your healing. And then another point we had, it got, as I found more altars that needed healing, there was new mechanisms came along all the time. And I ended up with an intensive care unit, and we had created this cool machine called the memory processing unit, and the parts that were in too much trauma and we didn't have time to deal with, and they were in too much pain to be able to go into it, we would give them this salve that would help them sleep, and then we'd hook them up to this memory processing unit that would take their memories, the hard ones, out and make them available for the rest of us when we're ready to process them, and then they could just sleep as their body healed. And it was like all these really, like, they gave me the ability when I was a kid to create whatever I needed, and then I made use of that in the healing and built whatever I needed, housing and play centers, and reassigned. I ended up with all my rear guard soldiers, ended up being they just loved the job of looking after all the babies and the children. They'd never got to play, they got to play. You wouldn't think that soldiers would be the ones to assign as caregivers to children, and yet they were ideal, perfect. Wow. And so it's like finding what each altar has to contribute and finding what they need to heal and giving it to them. And internal communication and everybody being able to see what was going on was important for me. But I didn't want them to I couldn't have all the altars present. So we set up a computer system in there that there was a monitor that everybody could watch. There was monitors everywhere, wrist monitors like out of sci-fis and stuff. And anybody could tune in to the outside world anytime they wanted, or they could turn it off. And there was just like, they gave me magic, so I made use of magic. But I also understood, by the time I was in healing, I had concepts of technology to include as well. And so I did.
Did you have to consciously choose to create each of these things, or to apply the salve to, parts that were really hurting, or did altars inside on a kind of more unconscious level get to do these healing things without your involvement?
Both. Some stuff I very consciously created because it was like, I need to deal with this. What am I going to do about it? And so I would come up with a plan to cope with it. Other things, just I'd check inside, and like, I checked in one day and there was this freaking computer monitor system, and it was like, what the heck is this? I was like floored. I hadn't even known it had been created. And then the healing, a lot of the healing would occur inside, and each part doing their own healing. And we'd assign the more capable ones to look after the more childlike ones. And then at some point it got to the point where I realized I had to set up shifts so that no part was expected to work 24/7. And so then setting up rotations, and for a while it became quite structured because I was trying to self-care all these different parts. And some parts played inside, and some parties, I even had some that had orgies in there. And other ones, 2 of them got married and had a baby that grew up to be who I am now.
Oh my gosh.
That's what they created inside this part. These 2, a male and female part, got married, and I did a ceremony for myself, and in the middle of it, I was in agony pain on the floor, didn't know what was wrong with me, and then afterwards was like, I just had a baby, and I didn't know I thought I was nuts then for sure. And they said, yeah, that's Patricia May, you're full potential. And it's like, what? And she grew it took her about 10 or 11 years, 12 years, 97 she was born. And she grew inside as the healing, and she grew up inside knowing everything that I knew. She didn't be disconnected from everything. And then she grew up inside, and at a certain point, she melded with the one that I called the shell, Trish. And then there was a year-long process of all of this other parts learning how to come through her, and it was a fascinating process to even try and explain. Whole story all by itself, I'm sure. But I mean, like, what can go? I didn't plan that. I didn't have any part in that. That just was a full-blown birth and child growing inside me that I knew nothing about. And yet that's the part that was created to hold everything that I had ever been, and that's who I am now, is that part.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing.
And so, like, I'm self-created.
Holy moly. A lot of survivors talk about that the host is kind of like a shell just to function.
For me, it was like a shell that everything else could come through.
Mm-hmm.
And she was nothing without some part filling her.
Wow.
It was like she was just an emptiness. And there was times when where I was in that shell, and I could go and try and feel any part of me inside, know anything, and I was blank. I didn't know anything. I didn't know who I was, what had happened to me, nothing, if I was just her and nobody was coming through her.
My gosh.
It was pretty weird.
Wow. So for survivors who feel this empty shellness and are struggling with not feeling a sense of self, do you have any suggestions for them to?
For that shellness, if you're getting nothing, for me, if I was getting an absolute blank, it meant that either I was overloaded and they'd all just withdrawn to give, because the shell, everyone else could go inside and take time off. The shell was always there, never got a break. And so sometimes everyone leaving was the only way to make that break, that just having a rest. Sometimes it was when they were all mad at her because she was not cooperating. She was just refusing to let them heal or express or deal with their memories or whatever. And so then it was a retaliation kind of punishment almost. It was like, and then sometimes I think it was when I was pushing too hard too, and it was like the wall would just go blank because I wasn't ready for more.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you. Okay.
Oh, yes, the cloud part. Female, male, whatever. How did you get the cooperation of that part to come in when it felt so restrictive to it and when it was in such pain? And how did you get that part to cooperate?
That was a long time ago. I think it was just making it clear that you're part of the body and we need your help to heal.
Mm-hmm.
And we will help you if you, and help, we can work together. And you don't have to be stuck in that last memory, and you don't have to be a cloud. You can be a little girl and play and have fun.
Wonderful. The two sort of different processes of altars being formed, the parts formed of your own will to some degree or another to cope, and then the parts that the programmers deliberately forced to split. Do you see the process of formation of those two different kinds of parts as being different?
There is a bit of a difference. It's more, when it's self-created, it's got more of a just an abrupt, there it is, most of the time. Where when it's created by them, it's like there's some kind of lead up to it somehow. Even if it's just like almost like it's being formed with the environment or the torture or the words, or something is starting that process before it actually is in place. Whereas when it was self-created, it was just like a point of no return was reached and it was sudden.
Interesting.
Brings me to another question. Some survivors kind of describe that when, in response to torture, when a new part is formed, it's not that they say that it's not actually a personality, it's more like a blank receptive state.
Yeah,
Is
yeah,
that
I think so. Mostly when it's brand new, at that moment, it's a blank slate. Yeah, if you're in torture and they bring you to that point of bringing you a new altar, that moment, it's like a being born into a readiness to do, learn, feel, whatever it is that will make it okay. Because there's some, even if you don't know the torture, don't feel the torture, there's some sense of absolute everything, entire physical, mental, emotional, soul being focused on what do I need to do now to be safe, to make it stop, or to make that person not get hurt. And even though that's not exactly there, consciously knowing it's all there, there's this, okay, I'm ready, tell me, teach me, I'll do whatever. It's like being born into that state.
Okay, and then that new receptive state gets developed more slowly into a personality than the ones you create yourself.
Yeah,
Now,
I think.
I'll wait.
No, I think that it depends on what they're doing. Some don't actually even, when they do things, they don't actually even make full personalities. They're just a specific lesson holder, or a pain holder, or a position holder, or something, a feeling holder. But if it's going to be a full-blown alter, then it would be a process of development over time, yeah.
Thank you, that's helpful. Now, the blank slate part, you're saying it might not fully even experience the pain. It's more in that blank receptive, I'm ready to do whatever I need to do.
It knows it's in, there's a sense of desperate readiness, willingness, but not necessarily any awareness of that or what it's about.
So, is there another alter that took the pain and terror of the torture the moments before?
Yeah. Yeah, there would be other, at least one, depending on what. For me, I think some parts took the words, some parts took the body, some parts took the feelings. So it was kind of like, it's already from birth for me. When the training starts really young, you're given, broken up, and have parts right from the start that are there to take some of the pieces. So they just automatically are there, and they're automatically taking their pieces and doing their parts, and then there's just more and more added on over time.
And they may resplit to take more of the pain, to spread the pain out more.
Yeah.
And then after the torture just continues, then a new blank slate part pops in. No?
Sometimes.
Okay.
Sometimes. If the parts that exist already aren't already doing their job of taking it away, if there's a new lesson that they want to have, or if I've reached some maximum point then that would be that point. Yeah.
Okay.
If, otherwise, there might not be a
new-
split.
Okay.
It might just be another memory, another incident.
What about when they change the torture to something that hasn't been experienced before? Is that more likely to have a certain kind of effect? A new kind of torture?
I think it can.
Mm-hmm.
Seems to me a lot of my additional splits off of things were, the word that comes to mind is shock. When there was something that threw me into a physical shock or a mental or emotional or spiritual shock. I had an altar that was in a movie. She thought she was being married to Satan, and she was the bride of Satan, princess. She thought this was a wonderful thing. Mm-hmm. And then the guy that was whoever doing Satan came up and just had long claw mark and just clawed down my chest. And this part thought she was the one that was getting married. She thought he loved her, and this was a wonderful, beautiful thing. And then when at that moment, it was such a complete shock to her, physical being, her mental, emotional. She was just so much shock. She stopped there. She ceased to move and grow beyond there. And another part came out that was much more hardened and much more suitable to be a bride to Satan in a lot of ways. And with that was actually, I think, a broken heart at that point for that part when she stopped growing and split off. And the other part came in place. And they never knew about that particular split.
The more hard one.
They didn't know that new part had come off of there. But it was absolute shock, betrayal. Heartbreak what caused that one.
So she no longer felt the connection, the love for Satan. She was easier to help then, I would assume, because she didn't buy in, or was she hard to help?
No, she stopped at that moment
And
just
then
before. So she never, until therapy, never remembered the nastiness. She just understood herself to be the bride of Satan and still had the rosy fairy tale picture of it. You wouldn't think fairy tale is Satan, but that's the way it was.
Well, they made it positive in some ways.
Yeah, and actually, it was actually a series of movies that this part was in that didn't know. She didn't come out in other places, other ways, and so to her that was the reality, was these satanic things, and they were actually a series of films.
How'd you end up helping her? How did you help her disconnect?
We gave her a divorce from Satan, for one thing. Did an all-out full divorce contract. Signed, sealed, and delivered.
And she was happy to do that?
When she'd found out that he hadn't actually married her, and when enough of the memories had been reclaimed. Yeah. That was a common thing with the altars, is that there isn't very often actual loyalty. Most of the time it's fear-based loyalty. It's the kind of loyalty that's forced on you. You do it because you have to and you don't know any other way. And most of the time when the altars are shown and made to understand that these were tricks, these were lies, these were cons, these were being manipulated, you were being used, they didn't care about you, they were, all of those things. There's shock, betrayal, anger, all that normal stuff. And at that point, it's quite often very easy to switch loyalties. When they made you agree to that stuff. You have choice now, and you're in the body, and you don't have to do what they say, and we would really, really appreciate your help. And not expecting them to trust, don't expect the altars to trust you right away. Mm-hmm. They need to learn to trust. Don't tell them they have to.
Yes.
And then, test it out, see what they say, like, okay, that was a lie, that was a con, we'll show you how it was done. Oh, look at that. Wow, that's a shock. I see the cameras, I see the tricks. Oh, okay, so that really is true. So why should we trust you, though? You're just another person. Why should we trust you? Well, don't until you think I should be trusted. And then that is giving them the power, and very quickly they want to be part of the cooperative. They want to be helping. Most of them were always trapped in some way in what they were allowed, and to have freedom to do what they want is cool. But also even to just like, most of them are motivated to do good, whatever their understanding of good is. And so if you give them a new understanding of good and the concept of cooperation and stuff, I personally think that human nature is to we are drawn to be cooperative beings, and we are drawn to do good and feel good, and if you give them the opportunity inside to do that, and they will. Even the nasty alters, even the harsh, nasty, horrific alters, actually understand they're doing good. And if you give them a new definition of good, and they aren't expected to just believe it, but come to understand and choose to have it, then they can do all kinds of good in other ways.
It's interesting to me that you talk about asking for their help. I've heard other people talk about, reaching out in love, extending caring and love, but it's interesting how much you ask them for their help and how they wanted to respond to that.
Your hands are bound and you're tied into what ways you're allowed to do. And then if you're given new ways to do things, for one thing, it's just plain interesting to have something new a lot of times. But I think that it's like, you're a part of me, you're a part of what, you have an important, you had an important part to play. You did what was needed to keep the body, the mind, the heart, the soul safe. You had to do the horrible stuff. You must have amazing skills that we would really appreciate being able to have on board now.
You might have already addressed this, but did you have parts that kind of, because of all of the pain in life that you went through, actually preferred to be an abuser, that actually adopted that, I'd rather be a hating SOB than be a vulnerable person in life, leave me alone, the cult way is, or the abuser way is better because I'll be competing for a more powerful position and I don't want to be nice and I don't want to... Did you have parts like that?
But not quite with that kind of I don't think they thought it through quite like that. It was more like, you're not taking away my power. This is the way to power.
Okay.
If I'm hurting you, you don't get a chance to hurt me. If I hurt you first, then I'm the one that I'm safer and I'm more powerful. And if I hurt you, you can't hurt me. And it's more about survival and self-protection than it appears. It's more about this is the way I understand the world works, and within that framework, I am not going to be this, so I must be this. Mm-hmm. So I am not going to be hurt anymore. I am not going to be victimized, so I'm going to hurt you first. And you expect me to get down on my knees. I was told to get down on my knees. I'm not doing that anymore. You get down on your knees for me.
Yes.
That kind of thing.
So how did you work? How did you and those parts work together?
It was different for different ones. It partly depended on what their beliefs. Always, it's working with belief systems. Belief systems are like the key to everything, and so it's asking and understanding what their beliefs are, and why do you believe that you need to have power over somebody and make them get down on their knees? Because if I don't make them get down on their knees, then I'll have to get down on mine. What if that's not the only option? What if nobody needs to get down on their knees? What? No way, that can't be possible. Yeah, let's see. Let's show you some options. And so it's education, it's internal education. It's internal sharing and counseling and growing. And showing that everything was black and white. It was this or it was this. That's not the real truth. Mm-hmm. There is not just black and white and maybe gray. There is a spectrum of choices and colors. And you can have that spectrum if you're willing to step outside of the box they locked you into.
Beautiful. Okay, in therapy, you had a number of therapists?
Yeah, I started out with one introductory one, mm-hmm. and then she hooked us. She was just sort of the finding out what's going on thing, and then she hooked me into a center that had counselors, and then I ended up initially just with one, and very quickly she got one of her co-workers, and we did some of the regression therapy hypnosis stuff where it was like get me really calm and still. Okay, so when you were this age, what was happening in your life? When you were this age, what was going on? And we started filling in the blanks. And so for about 2 or 3 years, I had hypnotherapy on Tuesday, and I had the other therapist on Thursday, and we debrief about what had happened, and sometimes it would be both of them. And then as time went by, and partly I moved out of their area for where they were covered for me to use have their services. And partly my roommate needed one of them, and I gave her to them.
Oh.
Because and I said, no, she needs you. You go to her. I'm okay with this one. And then I ended up with my son getting a therapist that turned out to know about this stuff, and I ended up with her, and then I had her from 95 until about 2 or 3 years ago was when most of the therapy was really finished. And during that time, I mean, that was the traditional psychotherapy, psychologist stuff. I also had massage therapy. I had, I used metaphysics. I did energy work. I did my own healing ceremonies of various sorts. I pulled on anything that called to me as might work for me. There's a lot of things I was very wary of that I didn't go near. I just really listened to what might work for me, and that changed over the years too. And the ways we approach therapy with just the traditional therapy, it depended on what was going on. Sometimes we used the EMDR method. Sometimes we used just the regression therapy. Sometimes it was just I'd come in with art and say, I need to deal with this. I did a lot of mapping and charting and graphing and stuff of different art altars and different trainings, and I just did whatever seemed to be right for me. And in the process of that was a certain amount of writing and speaking out in various areas as well, and getting therapy and learning to be a parent. One of the other authors in the book, Alison Miller, she also has a parenting seminars, living in families effectively seminars, and they were really, really helpful for me when I was taking those. I was learning to parent, but I was understanding and learning what hadn't happened for me or what had been messed up for me, and so that was a form of therapy in the process for my own healing, even though it was meant for my kid. And so it was a lot of different kinds of things over the years, but primarily the main therapists were there. Plus I had the therapists that were there especially for my son too.
In therapy,
Different therapists work differently with alters. Some therapists tend to try to talk through the host or the shell, have the host talk to the alters, and then the host tells the therapist what the alters said, and then other therapists work directly with the alters. What did you find helpful?
It depended. Sometimes a general, who knows what's happening here, or what do we need to do? Somebody inside knows what to do. Please tell us. And then we didn't necessarily have those alters say it. It would just come through the shell, through Trish. Other times it was like, okay, somebody's got something. Do we need to deal with them? Are they there? Can we talk to the one that's got this memory? And sometimes it was like, there's a bunch of parts. We know there's a bunch of parts have memories. Can everybody that has a piece of this please be here? And so it was kind of most effective to always talk as under the assumption that you're talking to everybody, whether everybody's there or not. That's the way I think works the best, is assuming that all the parts can hear. But knowing that you may have to specifically ask for different ones at different times, or specifically give a message to a part or something, because maybe they're sleeping, maybe they're just refusing to hear. But I think it needs to be flexible and flowing and be what it needs to be at any given time. And I think that the therapist and the client need to really work together cooperatively and let that flow and evolve and change as time goes by. Let the therapist say, what do you need today? And let what do I need today? Okay, today I'll try the MDR. Nope, today I need to just cry. And sometimes the therapist might know what you need and tell you, and sometimes you know.
Mm-hmm.
But if the therapist is telling you what you need and it feels wrong,
Mm-hmm.
you need to say so. You need to know to listen to yourself.
Mm-hmm.
The therapist is not an authority, a god over you like they were when we were growing up.
Yes. It sounds like you worked mostly with the host, communicating with the alters, but you also said that you did have alters sometimes talk directly to the therapist.
Well, for me, the host was really just the shell
Yes.
that everyone else came through.
Ah.
And the shell wasn't anything without an alter.
Uh-huh.
So there was always an alter speaking. That's all there was alters.
Interesting.
And then it was a matter of addressing this shell, knowing that there's going to be some alter, and the alter that's most apt and appropriate at any given time. Like maybe I might have my healer alter that's very focused on the learning part of the healing and the understanding the psychology of it. Or I might have another alter that needs to say, that hurt, I hated it. Or somebody else needs, those fucking assholes. So there might even be all of that busting out at once too. But it was just always all of me being. And then sometimes I was fully one alter, and everyone else went back, and that would be usually intentional when there was a piece of a memory that one alter was central to, and then we would have that alter only out.
Mm-hmm.
But even then, there'd be bits of other alters adding their pieces here and there.
Okay, thank you.
How are you doing now with the process of cooperation, integration?
Cooperating with myself. And integration. The actual integration of all the alters into one whole was a total surprise. I had long given up on that ever being what would happen to me. I did not figure integration was going to happen. It caught me completely by surprise. I just thought I was always going to be multiple and we'd all continue to heal. And then I integrated. And so then there's one of me, but I'm still integrating the wholeness of what happened and the wholeness of who I am now and who I choose to be, and the shedding of who I am not anymore too. There's as much shedding going on as reclaiming. And for the first year after integration, it was really harsh. It was like being born and being an infant, being a toddler, being a teenager, working my way through the developmental stages. And that's only a year and a half ago since it was fully, completely done. Partly writing the chapter helped do that. Nearly sent me over the edge. But it was, at this point, I've mostly got it all integrated at this point. But even after the integration was a process of integration.
And
because it was like, all of a sudden I have all these feelings, I have all these memories, I have everything. And how do I cope with that? And then how do I shed the parts that are healed, that I just can let go now? And so it was a learning and process for sure.
Trish, by the way, we didn't say earlier, Fotheringham is your last name, right?
Yes, Trish Fotheringham.
I don't think we said that at the beginning, so let's say it now.
Okay.
So the integration process that you were just describing and the growing up through the different stages of life and everything, that had to do with the birth that occurred through the marriage. And
that birth was in 97,
Mm-hmm.
and then that alter was like born like a little baby and grew up inside, being parented healthily inside by these parts that were already there, and that were her mom and dad, and they grew up, and then the integration in 2006 started, and ended in 2007. Took a year of the blending and merging and putting the parts together. And that child that was born, the one that was given my full name, Patricia May, and told that she was our full potential. And she got to the point where she held all the memories that we had claimed, and she was directly connected to all the altars inside. And then there was the shell Trish on the outside, and then this Patricia May part. And it was like, for a while, it was like she was on the inside with all the parts, and then there was this shell on the outside, and there was like a space between them. And then as time went by, it was like she got closer and closer and closer and closer to them, but we had resistance because it was like too much. We didn't know how to cope. And then we got given a piece that we didn't have to actually remember everything all the time and carry it all around in conscious memory at all times. And that was the, oh, yes, of course. And then the resistance was disappearing, and I had a whole lot of stuff going on in life at that time that all of my parts wanted the same thing. We all wanted it. We had reached a point of enough, and we didn't want it the way it was anymore, and we all just wanted things to be different, wanted it to be better. And everybody had a united purpose. And then there was no more resistance. And then this part that holded everybody inside mushed into the other part, and they kind of merged together, and there was only one part. But I have one friend that had integration, and her inner world disappeared.
Wow.
When she integrated. And then at another point in time, it turned out there was either a leftover, I guess it was a leftover altar, and there was no world for this altar. She was just floating around in black nothingness. And so that happened before my integration for my friend. So when I integrated, my parts knew, make damn sure that inner world stays there just in case. So my inner world is still in there. And because I was always multiple, I think that that's the way I function. And so I don't have multiple personalities anymore, but I have what is called, for me, little functionaries. They shrank right down to little functions, and they control the little functions of the body and the brain and things, but they're not personalities. They're not, it's like they went from being every altar was a full-sized human being inside my mind, to these tiny little dots that they are now, and they're just there in case they're ever needed.
Yes.
And they're not, so I don't know whether that's what happens to anyone else, but that's what happens for me.
Okay.
And that's another thing I would say is everybody is different. Every integration is different. Every altar system is different. And therefore every healing process is different. Must be personally driven by the people inside of them.
Yes.
Not externally told how it should be.
Yes.